From prison in Rome, Paul writes to friends in the imperial city of Philippi. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. Have no anxiety. The Lord is near. In everything that happens, by prayer with thanksgiving, let your needs be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all our understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Have no anxiety. No one shall make you afraid. Do not be afraid of anyone. You have no need to fear them. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be dismayed. You will not fear the terror by night. Do not be alarmed. Do not be afraid of their faces. It is I. Be not afraid. Arise. Be not afraid. Do not worry about your life. Do not be anxious about tomorrow. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. Have no anxiety. It's all over the old book. Various words for fear, dread, anxiety occur several hundred times in the Old Testament and over 100 in the much smaller New Testament. Now tell me, if a mother is always nagging her son about his messy room, you know something. His room is usually a mess. If the old story is always telling him not to worry, to be anxious, to be afraid, you know something. You know they're worried, anxious, and afraid. Probably about the same things we are. The stranger, the weather, the incomprehensible and unpredictable, disease, death. Creatures of this earth, they and we, limited in strength and knowing, vulnerable, prey to all kinds of danger and devastation. Childbirth has always been an ascent into the precincts of death for both mother and child, and certainly more so back then than now. Infant mortality was common, and raising rambunctious kids has always been a hair-raising, if not hair-removing experience. Plato bemoans the fact 2,500 years ago that the teenagers of his time are lazy, insolent creatures who think of only one thing. The disease and the disaster of plagues was frequent. The ravages of old age came along, at about age 40, in fact. And of course, there were the wars and rumors of wars every so often, even as we now face it every day. The scary, troubling anxiety. Isn't it a heightened reality in all our lives these days between Iraq and SARS? Indeed, civilization can be seen as a campaign against our frailty, our vulnerability, an ages-long struggle to house and heal, to hold off the ravages of age, the effort to understand and master the world around us a bit so that we can bring under control the threats that are both natural and human. And to the degree that we've been successful in rising above our creaturely limits, we can only be grateful and determined to preserve and advance this noble human endeavor in our time. But has it reduced our anxiety? Has it softened our worry? Are we less prone to troubled heart and mind than our ancestors down on the farm or out in the bush? There are reasons to believe just the opposite, in fact. You're familiar with these lists going around about the advances of the last half century. Kids don't know what a record player is, or a typewriter, or a television without a remote control. But think of the worries, the reasons for panic that our vaunted civilization has dumped on us. Air travel, it seems to me, typifies our predicament. Flight is a marvel of just half a century. It has enabled us to do and see what our forebears could only dream of. It has expedited travel and made the world smaller and business easier. But is it not at the same time harder on the nervous system than more primitive forms of movement with all its delays and hassles and security controls, not to mention the uncertain trusting of your very life into the hands of unseen human beings, we hope, at the front end of that aluminum sausage, wondering whether the captain had a fight with his wife last night? Horse and buggies never fell out of the sky. George Kaufman once said, I like terra firma, the more firma, the less terra. One airline pilot tells on a particular flight, he had hammered his ship a little harder than usual into the runway upon landing, and he said he had a difficult time even looking his passengers in the eye. You know, as he stood by the cockpit door, they got off. Finally, at the end came an elderly lady walking with a cane. She said, "Sonny, mind if I ask you a question?" "Why, no, ma'am," said the pilot. "What is it?" The elderly one said, "Did we land or were we shot down?" And you know, I remember that when I was an adolescent, April 15th was just the day on which my dad paid the taxes. College acceptance did not generate anywhere near the panic or pain that it does now. Look it up. There's a Kaplan College website which now has a list of the top 10 things to do with those college rejection letters. Nor did we have quite the problem worrying about our peers and whether they would accept us. We had grown up together from age 2, most of us in my neighborhood, but moving about from community to community, from home to college to God knows where, puts more stress into the question as to whether and where we will belong. Or there's the life of the singles crowd, which when I was young scarcely existed beyond the age certainly of 22. But a young man said recently that the most painful words he knows now are these: "George, let's just be friends." Or there's work in a world where company loyalty, or even the existence of the company for a year from now, can be in doubt. In the midst of all the current uncertainty, one middle manager says that we all carry our resumes around on a diskette in our shirt pockets. One man describes his life out there in the business world as being like a deep-sea diver who is walking around on the ocean floor in his diving suit in the murky dark, unable to see 3 feet in front of him, while above him is the mother ship, the firm, to which he is connected by an air hose, his lifeline, and suddenly he hears a call coming over his intercom: "Come up at once, the ship is sinking." You have to think about that a little bit. And we know about possibilities of illness our grandparents never dreamed of. The television ads tell us every night all the troubles of body and mind that we need to watch out for. I suppose you heard about the fellow who went to his doctor for his annual physical, and at its conclusion the physician said, "Well, you look real good for a man of 60. "Doctor," he protested, "I'm only 47. "I know," said the doctor. You know, if you can't laugh about this stuff, there's no... We who have children or grandchildren worry about what? We worry about the internet, about schools where we can no longer guarantee their safety. We worry about alcohol in the automobile. Have you ever thought of the fact that 100 years ago the designated driver was your horse? If ever an age seemed, for all its mastery of environment and psyche, designed to generate and sustain anxiety, I think we've done it. Surely it's no accident that so many of our diseases are related to emotional and mental dis-ease, or that living so much longer we find the advancing years a journey into the scary unknown. You see, as never before, with all our technical wizardry, we've achieved nothing like absolute control and security. There lurks ever in the background of our brains the recognition that we remain, for all our struggle, nerves and skin, and the result of that is an underlying anxiety that depletes our health and undermines our hope on many days. So how do we deal? First of all, as I told the young people, by admitting it. I'm scared. You're scared. Or we call it stress. That seems so much more, how shall I say it, less frightening. First of all, admit it. In prayer with thanksgiving, make your needs known to God, and so to yourself. Read the psalmists. They're full of fear. The reality of our anxiety for many of us is that we manage, however, to submerge it to the point where we can get through our days without really being conscious of it. It shows up indirectly in the ways we function with one another. If we tend to over-control in our dearest relationships with others, we can pretty well bet that some dread about them and their lives is eating away. Others can be a source of a lot of anxiety, and one response is to try to get a handle on them so they don't do those stupid things we just know are not going to do them any good. Adolescents invite that response big time. Two kinds of people in the world. For the first, life is an organized, orderly pursuit of noble goals with people they trust and enjoy. And for the second kind, life is a series of haphazard, random unpredictabilities that blindside them repeatedly, and all parents of teenagers are in the second category. They make us anxious, and one response is to manipulate so as to make us feel more secure about them. And the same thing can happen with our work if we're not careful. We worry about what? Reversal, failure, double the hours, try to nail down everything, work weekends, be on our guard, double think every move we make. The other way we deal with our anxieties is to immerse ourselves in some sort of diversion. Sit evenings before the tube, get on the internet for hours on end. That's what many of our college young people do. Go to a movie, anything to take our mind off reality. 2,000 years ago, a Greek philosopher wrote, "When I drink enough wine, my worries go to sleep." Now look, there's nothing wrong with trying to manage our lives a bit better or going mindless from time to time. It's when these become our continual resort that they tell something about us. Even if we don't feel scared, are not breaking out in sweat, something may be eating away at us inside. And I mean literally, in stomach or heart or brain. So first of all, surface the fear. Dennis Gersten, an MD, says, where is the fear in your body right now? Just observe yourself. Allow the fear to arise and change and maybe even begin to dissolve a bit. Embrace your fear. For the experience of accepting and embracing our fears allows for the beginnings of some transformation of that fear. It has less power. Surface the fear and spot, above all, the attitude behind the fear. What do our anxieties say about our perception of reality? They tell us, do they not, that sooner or later life will undoubtedly turn sour or dark or unfortunate. Sooner or later we will lose or fail or be miserable or get sick or die. Isn't that what our anxieties intimate about reality? But what if that's not the whole truth? Indeed, not even the most important truth. And now, my friends, all that is true, all that is noble, all that is just and pure, all that is lovable and attractive, whatever is excellent and admirable, fill your minds with these things, and the peace of God will be with you. Now, I don't think he's calling for some kind of thought control here. Keep your mind on the good stuff and the bad stuff won't bother you so much. He's talking about attention to the truth that there are realities that do win out in life. Because of the resurrection faith born with Jesus, life always does finally turn out all right, even if at times it is all wrong and scary and troubling and depleting and disappointing. Ultimately, your life will be all right. Peter Berger, a well-known sociologist, made this, I think, concrete by reflecting on how a mother comforts her child. Child wakes up in the night, perhaps from a bad dream, beset by nameless threats. At such a moment, the contours of trusted reality are blurred for that child or invisible, and in the terror of the chaos inside that child's head, it cries out for whom? For mother. It is she, and in many cases she alone, who has the power to banish the chaos and restore the benign shape of reality. And she will speak or sing to the child, and the content of this communication will invariably be the same. Don't be afraid, everything is all right. And if all goes well, the child is reassured and his trust in reality is recovered. And then Berger asks the real question, is the mother lying to the child? Everything is in order. Everything will be all right. This is the basic formula of maternal and parental reassurance. Not just this particular anxiety, not just this particular nightmare, but everything will be all right. The formula can, without in any way violating it, be translated into a statement of universal scope. Have trust in life. And if we're to believe the child psychologist, this is an experience which is absolutely essential to the process of becoming a healthy human being. Yet mother's words can only be justified within a religious frame of reference. For in this frame of reference, the natural world within which we are born and love and dream and die is not the only world, but only the foreground of another world in which love is not annihilated in death, and in which therefore trust in the power of love to banish chaos inside is justified. Mother's role is not based on a loving lie. On the contrary, it is a witness to the ultimate truth of our situation in reality. Everything will be all right. Spot what your anxiety is saying so that you can fight it with truth. And then finally, surrender it all to your God. Surrender your life with all its anxieties and fears and questions and hopes into His hands. The reality that life is not in your control does not mean that it is out of control. And you can trust God with it, must trust God with it in your heart of hearts. I know it's a worn cliche. One almost hesitates to say it one more time, but it is the answer that comes at us again and again out of this old faith. The call for the inner movement in which we turn our lives over to God one more time, rest them in His power and love. And this answer to our fears is not finally, I remind you, an intellectual exercise at all. Trust is not a calculation, but an act of courage in which we let go, surrender all our hopes and fears, our desires and dreads, into the hands of the invisible that somehow we know is there. The German theologian Karl Heim liked to describe it all as falling. Falling like the little fledgling bird. You know, one day mother returns to the nest not just to feed her little one, but to nudge the little guy until in abject terror he reaches the edge of the nest and falls out toward the ground below, only to discover as he falls that the air below holds him up and grants him a whole new freedom and life. This is very much the way that theologian poet Wendy Wright describes the experience with a little prayer of hers. How dark the seeing, how fragmentary life. Most of it consists, I think, of learning to free fall, learning to trust the constant somersaulting of the days, learning even to love the darkness, learning to trust the brief glimpses, learning that blindness has its own seeing, learning that the falling is in itself beautiful, that at the bottom, the well of my heart, I free fall into you, O God. Surrender of our cares and our dreams to another, this inner movement of trust is the only reality that enables us to take back our life with each new day, go out into it one more time, live it effectively and caringly and with some joy. No matter what comes, yes, even death. In fact, it's only as we slowly but surely learn to trust even there that we're able to trust even here on a fine morning in the midst of life. It's the trust we learn from Jesus, who on the night before his own death is able to struggle to the point where he can say, Father, it's in your hands. The late Rosalind Russell, noted for many film portrayals of witty, sophisticated New York career women, also experienced many triumphs on the Broadway stage, but perhaps her greatest triumph was her gallant fight against arthritis and then cancer. After her death in 1976, this poem was found tucked away in her prayer book. Trust him when dark doubts assail thee. Trust him when your faith is small. trust him when simply to trust him is the hardest thing of all. And an old man sits in a Roman prison under the shadow of impending execution, and he writes to dear friends, have no anxiety, God is near, always. That's peace for us enough. Amen.